As the pandemic is a very important subject and one that is all around us, whether we want it or not, it would be absolutely impossible to keep the virus out of the agenda of CYBERSEC Global Forum, which this year is a remote online experience for most of us precisely for that reason, the reason of the pandemic and the virus. In the panel on Expanding Reliance on Digital Tools, providing us with the best practices from digital leaders in the time of COVID-19, we would like to focus on the general and concerted effort to combat challenges, provide answers, and help to mitigate the spread of the virus. May I present Andrzej Dopierała, President of Asseco Data Systems Management Board and Vice President of Asseco Poland Management Board, Ciaran Martin, Professor of Practice in Public Management at the Blavatnik School of Government, Oxford University, and CEO of UK NSCS in 2016-20. And Flavio Aggio, Chief Information Security Officer at the World Health Organization. The panel is hosted by Rafal Rohozinski, CEO of the SecDev Group.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome very much to this session focused on best practices from digital leaders in the time of COVID-19. In my estimation, the most interesting and engaging session of this year's CyberSec. My name is Rafal Rohozinski, and for the next 45 minutes or so, my task is to moderate this stellar panel. Now, the COVID pandemic represents an unprecedented challenge to the global system. In fact, we may look back at 2020 much in the same way as we did in the years following World War II, which signaled a transformation in the global system. Within a few short months, fundamental features of the global system, from air travel to supply chains, sustaining trade, have been radically fragmented and reordered. While a small number of countries have recovered quickly, most have closed down their borders, and everyday life is being profoundly disrupted through closures and lockdowns. The economic costs are severe and only just getting started. The World Bank is projecting a decline of 8% in global GDP. International trade will contract over 31% in 2020, according to the WTO. And making matters worse, COVID is occurring at a time of heightened global tensions, trade wars, and tariffs. The pandemic arrived precisely at the moment when international cooperation was most needed to deal with not just infectious diseases, but a myriad of global challenges, from climate change to nuclear threats to cybersecurity. Perhaps most fascinating, since it started spreading in late 2019, COVID has accelerated the digital transformation of countries, corporations, and societies. And the reasons are quite straightforward. With the imposition of lockdowns, restrictions, and physical distancing, people have been forced to work remotely, access services online, and communicate through digital means. Dependence and use of cloud computing will increase between 12 and 22% in 2020. Network operators have already seen a 40 to 50% increase in demand for video data services. And video conferencing, such as the one that we're using today, has increased by 700% since January. And not surprisingly, video conferencing services such as Zoom have seen their valuations climb to unprecedented heights. And this growing dependence on all things digital has a dark side. Cybercrime, including ransomware attacks against critical infrastructure, hospitals, companies, and governments, are soaring. COVID-themed cyber incidents have grown exponentially, as have incidences of ransomware directed against government infrastructure. In August, the Border and Customs Service of Argentina was held ransom by such attack. Over the past 6 months, we've witnessed the world's largest ever natural experiment. We've had an opportunity to observe core enablers of digital resilience, from operational continuity to data privacy to cybersecurity, and seen how they operate in practice. And at this stage, it's really hard to determine who will be the winners and the losers in this pandemic age. But 6 months into this strange new COVID era, we can start seeing some lessons. And it's those lessons and emerging best practices that we're here to focus on in our discussion today. So joining me today is Flavio Aggio, Chief Information Security Officer of the World Health Organization, who prior to joining the WHO accumulated over 30 years of experience in specialized chemical manufacturing, semiconductor, and other industries, and also served as the Chief Technology Officer for the city of San Francisco. We're also to have with us today Ciaran Martin, who, besides being the Professor of Practice and Management of Public Organizations at Oxford Universities, don't let the tweed suit and leather patches fool you, was also the founding Chief Executive Officer of the National Cybersecurity Centre of the UK, where he led a fundamental shift in the UK's approach to cybersecurity. I'm also very pleased to welcome to the panel Andrzej Dopierała, No, not the famous Polish actor, but rather the president of Asseco Data Systems, one of Poland's largest IT companies. Andrzej has had a distinguished career in IT, serving as the president of HP and Oracle in Poland, as well as responsibility for Oracle's middleware software business in Central Europe. Andrzej, welcome. So, gentlemen, COVID has had an undeniable impact on the global economy. But the question is, has it really permanently changed the nature of business and the nature of work? And if so, what kind of impact has it had in the area of digital safety and resilience? And perhaps I can call on you, Ciaran, as you've had the flag to hold at a national level, to perhaps reflect on whether this is new wine in old bottles or simply old wine in new bottles.
Well, who knows? I mean, we can't fully judge the long-term impact on the way we work, but I don't see too many people arguing that everything will go back to the way it was in terms of homework, in terms of do we need to travel, in terms of what are we prepared to discuss online, and so on. And as you say, it's been a great national and international experiment in human nature. And you know what? I'm going to start with something positive and optimistic, because there's so much misery around, and that's very real for people, whether it's healthcare, their own health, the health of their loved ones, or the economics of 2020. Let's think about how technology has risen to the challenge. I mean, you mentioned a fascinating statistic about video conferencing going up 700%. And, you know, not just me wearing, well, I'm not quite in tweed yet, but we're all sort of dressing down a little bit. Just think of a world where technology fell over this year, either through it was unable to cope with the increased capacity, or where, I know cybersecurity is a real risk, but there've been some serious incidents, but there are always serious incidents. There hasn't been that total collapse in trust and performance of technology. So technology this year has kept us going professionally as much as we can, and it's kept us going personally in terms of keeping in touch with loved ones. Grandparents may not be able to hug their grandchildren in lots of countries, but at least they can see them and talk to them and smile at them and so on over Zoom or whatever platform we're doing. So I think actually the lesson for those of us in our field, the lesson from this year is that public trust in technology is now an absolutely essential public good. Some things will change. I don't know what things are permanent and what things are temporary from this crisis, but some things will not go back to the way they were. What I think is now absolutely critical for people like us is that we do everything we can to make sure that our public, our citizens, have well justified trust in the technology they're using. That, for me, is the lesson for technology of the pandemic of 2020.
Thank you, Ciaran. Andrzej, now you've been very much on the sort of front lines of this, running one of the largest IT companies in Poland. How have you seen the impact through your lens?
Well, so I must say I have a rather unique experience, because I'm on both sides of the fence. On one hand, I'm responsible for IT and cybersecurity of Asseco companies in Poland. On the other hand, one of our companies in the SecDev Group, Comcert, provides cybersecurity services. So I'm like a client and the provider at the same time. So I see the challenges from both perspectives. And the big thing is we've been talking about working remotely and making this more popular or more widespread for quite some time. And we're thinking about policies and how to ensure the data protection, and how to ensure that people are actually working and not just sitting at home. And then we're talking about it for months. And then mid-March came, the lockdown came, and we did it overnight. So that was a very interesting experience. That if somebody told me, just a month before that we would be able to do it, I would be just smiling that this is impossible. And yet, we humans are quite flexible, so we adapt, and we had to adapt, so we did. And of course, many industries, they can work using technology. Luckily, like for me, IT industry is a core example that we can do things working from home, working remotely, and many such organizations where it was fairly easy to go cyber and go digital. However, for many organizations, this has been a novelty, especially like public administration, that it was normal that the clerk comes into the office building and works there, and he has all his tools and all his documents that he accesses right there. And then moving that work to the cyber cyberspace, and making this online was quite an experience. When I'm thinking about what will stay, of course, one thing I'm personally convinced that will not go back 100% to what it was, and whatever you think about it, going to the office or traveling as much. So this will be some hybrid between what we are doing today and what we have been doing 6 months ago. And probably there will be many different variations of the way we operate. Surely the technology is proved itself that it's useful and that it touches so many aspects. So for many people, this was a very new experience that they can do so much online. IT companies have been evangelizing going digital for many years, and telling organizations that you should move your processes to digital space. You should get out of paper. Should limit the necessity for immediate contacts. And then the pandemic came, and many organizations were better prepared for that. Nobody was prepared 100% because nobody could have been. But this was quite a journey that we've all taken, and it's exciting actually where we are now. Surely, I'm not saying that by no means that this is a good situation. I would much rather have that there was no COVID and we're still in the old ways. But okay, what happened, and right now as a technology providers, we have a much greater role, which I enjoy very much.
So, Flavio, perhaps no organization more in the world has had to adapt to COVID operationally than has the WHO. So, from your perspective, what's new and what's old, and how successful has that transition been?
From my perspective, in the beginning, it was quite risky to imagine that all operations will happen online. But because of the cloud implementation, not completely full cloud implemented in WHO, but majority of key systems were implemented with cloud, it was quite easy for us to operate remotely. And teleworking was possible, but was not with the same percentage. Currently, we support the organization with a high percentage because of the strategy that was put in place in the migration to cloud. So I see as a positive way for us to really, from one side, is a business continuity experimentation for not only WHO, but for many industries. And the most difficult part will be for organizations that didn't transition. On the bad side, and maybe looking also as positive, from my perspective, we will only be able to move forward after the pandemic, after COVID is addressed, if we move to the zero trust model. And that philosophy of zero trust is quite easy for me to exemplify. Many IT organizations or many IT departments have the misconception that what is inside is secure. So advanced persistent threat groups easily go through firewalls, basic protection, and laterally move inside of the organization. So one thing that my recommendation to everyone to start thinking about is to implement a zero trust philosophy model. It's a journey along with cloud. No doubt that is the future. And with that, we will be able to be more resilient and being able to manage the risk that the organization is willing to take. Because as you know, there's no 100% secure system. What we can do is to implement processes, technology, and people to manage risk. That's my view.
So that's fascinating, Flavio, and I'm glad you raised the issue of zero trust networking. I think also among the panelists, you've had really the broadest perspective in terms of either sectors or countries that have done the best under COVID. Do you have any sort of favorites? And can you sort of point and say these organizations or these countries have done better because?
What I can say is I have a relationship with multiple governmental entities, multiple CERTs that exchange information with us, and doing better is relative. So all the industrialized organizations can or did well because they already, as I said, implemented cloud, implemented some sort of teleworking processes and technologies, and the countries with new infrastructure did quite well. I will not exemplify specific countries or industries because I will not have all the data to make that assessment. But what I can say is organizations that implemented teleworking in combination with cloud strategy and organizations that move forward with at least identity security for applications, which is one step closer to zero trust, did quite well. The organizations that were rigid and really connected to the old style didn't do well. I heard about several hospitals. I'm aware of hospitals that were attacked, and their infrastructure were paralyzed for multiple hours or days, and that was really damaging, especially during the pandemic. This is basically what I can share. And lastly, one thing that I like to say all the time, we invest a lot in technology. We have to invest a lot more on the human knowledge and the human understanding, not from the user point of view, but also from the IT. And so we need an upgrade of our human OS. So our operating system working digitally needs to adapt much more now than before, and this will not stop. So this is my message to the public.
Now, Ciaran, you've stepped out of the trenches and the front line of politics, and from your perch in Oxford, I'm just wondering, as you've been observing countries and institutions that you know so well responding to COVID-19, who has done better and who has done poorly, and why?
Do you mean in terms of I'm not an expert on healthcare. I can talk about how people have managed the technological response. I think is quite interesting. But it's up to you. What do you mean?
No, I'm saying that the technological response in terms of what industries and countries have seemed to have done better.
So I'm genuinely impressed by the way the globe has handled the technological challenge. I honestly think there's some real heroes. I know, obviously, the real heroes of the pandemic are frontline health workers in all of our countries, but the people who've been out, the people in the telcos who have coped with this surge in demand, the people who've been running around in this country in wet evenings, fixing cabinets to make sure that people are still connected to the internet, I think have done really well. I actually think that the private sector, by and large, I love Flavio's stuff about earning trust through zero trust, but I think another word about trust, another word other than trust that we need to talk about is risk. And I think cybersecurity is basically about risk. We over-glamorize cybersecurity, but it's just about risk management. And in an emergency, and let's face it, this is one heck of an emergency, people's risk calculations change. So normally, as I think both Anders and Flavio said, you would be crazy to say, right, my organization is going to go and work from home tomorrow, everyone. We've only got 2% working from home now, but tomorrow everyone's going to work from home. But that's essentially what we did. And so we changed our risk calculation in accordance with the times. And I think that's why sometimes, governments did really well. But I think it was a challenge for, say, the organization I used to lead, the National Cybersecurity Center, which tends to work a mixture of in the classified environment, which is very fixed and you need access to locations, and the open environment. So I think, look, there are various comparators across the world about who did well managing the healthcare aspects of the pandemic. But in terms of technology, our global technological sector, I think, stood up really well, with one exception. And I think we're now seeing that in Europe, and we're seeing it in North America: ransomware. So in terms of deliberate hostile attacks from nation states and so forth, on vaccine researchers, on key strategic industries and so on, and even criminal attacks on things like food production and so forth, we did well to cope with risk. But we're plagued by ransomware at the moment. We had that tragedy in Germany 2 weeks ago where a hospital patient died on the way to a different hospital because the original hospital couldn't admit her. There seems to be quite a significant incident in the United States at the moment. So in my view, the biggest threat from technology to the management of the pandemic is the fact that criminals using ransomware who don't know who they're attacking start to impair the provision of healthcare. And we see that happening. We see it happening in Europe. We see it happening in North America. So I don't think there's a country by country thing. Technology is so globalized, certainly in the West, it's so sort of westernized and integrated that it's more or less been the same performance across most countries. It's done really well, but we've got to get after ransomware.
Yeah, Flavio, this is obviously something which is of concern to you. I'm wondering if you have any comment on what Ciaran just meant about ransomware and its risk.
I'd like to compliment in relation to ransomware, but also basic attacks that APTs are really addressing. And the element that I see here is service providers, cloud providers, even country security will need to step up to prevent those types of attacks, to anticipate, and working together and sharing knowledge is the only way forward, because there is no one system or organization in town that can cope with all the attackers globally. So that is an alert that I put in place. The second part is the ability from the service providers to prevent those attacks. I'm talking about ISPs, I'm talking about cloud providers, cloud service providers, to anticipate. And the last comment that concerns me the most, and I think we didn't talk about it, ransomware is an important factor, but to me, to the WHO organization, information war is one of the most critical elements. So we are in the middle of a cyber and information war. So what is real news, what is fake news? And this disseminated like fire, especially with the pandemic, and especially with most of the population working from home and consuming data and publishing data. So information war is a major concern.
Really quick response.
The info. Yeah, go ahead.
So I really that because I know you want to move on to Andrzej, but I agree. Information war is a big deal, a big threat. The thing about information war and disinformation, it's really hard and complicated for defenders and for governments and so forth. Ransomware shouldn't be that hard. So I would like to be able for governments to devote more resources to the sort of really difficult problem that Flavio has just articulated. But at the same time, we're not getting on top of ransomware, and we should be.
So on this question of new kinds of threats or old threats that have become amplified as a result of COVID, from the disinformation through to ransomware, I'm wondering, Andrzej, we've also seen a fairly unprecedented period of innovation from how technologies have been applied to be able to secure this now distributed and globally dispersed workforce. We've already talked about zero trust networking, the importance of that, and trusted digital identity. I wonder if there's any particular new approaches technologically that you've come across that you think are significant and important in the last 6 months.
Well, one thing to realize is that the bad guys are also using all the advancements of technology as the good guys are using. So we move to the cloud, they move to the cloud. We use AI, they use AI. So it's like an ongoing war, and it will just continue. And the thing is that during the pandemic, the activities, as you said, have amplified by not just by a few percent, but sometimes a threefold, fivefold, and this creates a huge challenge. But we all know that the weakest link in the cybersecurity is always the person. Fortunately or unfortunately, but that's the case. So it's still easier to make the person click the wrong link than to break through the firewall. And and especially now that people are sitting at homes, working from home, and they stare in this camera for 8 hours, and they are, in my opinion, many people are less aware than they would have been sitting in the office, especially considering how quickly the bad guys react. For instance, the government announces there will be a program for small companies to subsidize your business, and boom, 5 hours later, you receive an email in your inbox, which appears to be coming from some government agency saying, we will help you with your application for this program that was just announced. And so they are very tricky. Or the same, there is some breaking news about the new vaccination, and comes the email about maybe you will want to become a part of the trial. So they are very creative, and the amount of this has increased drastically. So yes, of course, the application of the tools that have been, we have used them and we have known them before as well, but the need to use those tools to defend yourself from the malicious mails, for instance, but also to kind of monitor all those advanced persistent threats. This is becoming more and more needed. So, in my opinion, some organizations, some sectors have been better prepared. Take financial services or take energy or service providers. So they had to deal with it a lot. But there are many sectors that have not been prepared. And now building up your capabilities to build the cyber resilience in a short period of time, it's very difficult, because right now we see the demand for cybersecurity professionals, for experts, has increased because everybody needs those people. So here is a big role for the governments to come with some ideas to assist. Because as I said, like the big bank already has its big cybersecurity department. It has a monitoring and has tools, procedures, everything is in place. They have to modify them for remote work, but it's still fairly easier than for somebody that got maybe half a guy taking care of antivirus and maybe managing firewalls. So this is the role for the government, like sectorial CSIRTs, for instance. That's one of the initiatives that the Polish government is now proceeding a novel to our Cybersecurity Act, going into that direction. And the other thing too, which we see, is that the increase because of the shortage of the specialists. So the need for managed services. And so somebody that has not been dealing with cybersecurity before now has to do it. The example that was mentioned about this hospital in Düsseldorf 2 weeks ago, it's a tragic example. And it's not because the hospital before was stupid not to invest in cyber defense, but it just didn't have to do it. Yes? So now many organizations are finding themselves in such position that, okay, before it was okay, now it's not anymore, but what do? We don't have anybody to guide us through it. So it's a big role for both the government and the private sector to come up with such managed services and to help the organizations to build their cyber resilience. But I want to stress the role of building awareness among the people. And this really goes beyond just the employees or private or public sector. I believe, this awareness and cybersecurity education, this should be a topic at schools, starting quite early, actually, to really, somebody mentioned before, this human operating system. So I do believe that cybersecurity should be embedded in us and taught to us from very early stage of as soon as the kid starts interacting with his iPod, but then just keep on reinforcing it and in your professional and your human life. Because okay, if you have a conversation with your grandmother and somebody hacks into it, there will be some, maybe you become an object of jokes for some time, but no huge harm done. But if it's a business conversation, or maybe it's a conversation with your partner that you are having some intimate words, you don't want that to be published on an Instagram or in the or some social media. So because then you may feel like this Argentinian parliament member a few days ago. So that this privacy becomes very important. So I believe the governments have huge role, but education.
So you raised a really interesting question, which I'd like to touch on in the sort of dying moments of our panel here, and it really has to deal with privacy and data protection. Innovation is one thing, distributed workforces is another, infodemics is the third altogether. But the reality is that protecting the data that is core to enterprises, governments, and ensuring the privacy of individuals has really become something of an important issue that also has a significant political touchstone. In the rush to get out contact tracing applications, for example, protect data on individuals that may have been infected by COVID-19, this has certainly come to the fore. And I guess I'd like to ask all of you, how well have we done in squaring concerns around privacy and data protection as we've adapted to this new distributed online world? And Ciaran, maybe I'll ask you to lead us off.
Great question. And now that I've got the luxury of being out of the trenches wearing my tweed and my academic ivory tower, I can say I don't know, and we probably need to do more work on it. And I think what we need to do more of is have conversations with the public, with citizens about this. I actually think this has been one of the less good parts of what we've been doing. I mean, certainly in the way that this type of issue is covered in the UK, you would think that lots of the rest of the world are happily using extremely effective public health tools on their phones, and that doesn't seem to me to be the case. Also that, if you look at the coverage of some of the Asian countries like South Korea and so on, who've done some really good stuff in tracing people, but they've done it through things like bank transactions and nightclubs and so forth. And we've allowed that to be lazily reported as effective government rather than, look, that's possible in a country like the UK, but it's not the way we do things. And we could have a conversation about the sort of privacy and security trade-offs that we're doing, and we're not really having it. At the same time, on contact tracing apps, I think there's a dearth of evidence, particularly with decentralized models. Sure, lots of people are using them, but what's the public health impact? We don't really know yet. And so people can't really make judgments, and politicians can't make judgments about the sort of trade-offs that we're going to have. So that's one thing we need to have more of a conversation of. We can do more with technology for contact tracing, but there are serious privacy trade-offs in doing so. The second thing I think we need to be more organized about is that because of the way contact tracing is now working organically in lots of countries, including the one I'm sitting in, we are throwing away loosely quite a lot of information whenever we go somewhere. And I think we need more of a conversation about what's going to happen to that, assuming that this type of arrangement continues all the time. And I think we're at the foothills of that conversation. So I think that we need to do a little bit more. I think it is understandable that in the very early stages of the emergency, we did some things without fully thinking through and fully having the open dialogue about the trade-offs. I think now we need to have it, given that we're in this for the long haul.
So Flavio, you have a privileged position of looking at this from a global perspective. So same question to you, privacy and data protection balancing against public health and technical innovation.
So this is a very one of the most challenging topics besides the information war that I just described. The question about privacy is an important one, and multiple countries and regions are putting regulations in place to address this issue. And in WHO, for example, we have an internal policy to not capture personal identifiable information. However, when there is an emergency between life and data, you choose to protect life. So when you have a real emergency, you will do things to really protect people, to protect lives. I agree with the comment before that this topic needs to be well developed, well discussed, not only with the public, but with the service providers, with IT organizations, because two things I always think about. Do we have an effective information classification? And should we have a standard in how to classify information? And the second step is, when the information is classified as sensitive, what are the technological mechanisms we can standardize on especially with encryption, to make that information only available when the owner of the information decides to make it available. I think we are far from this type of standardization discussions, but I think those are essential to be able to have a better implementation of privacy and manage also the information war on the other side. So those are my comments related to privacy.
Thank you, Flavio. And as we're wrapping into the last 3 minutes of the panel, I think I'd like to end by asking each of the three of you to gaze into your crystal ball over what has occurred over the last 6 months and look into the next 12 months and perhaps leave us all with your number one and number two, or your top two recommendations for what either governments or what corporations should be doing as we struggle through the second year of COVID and hopefully towards a resolution through a vaccine. So perhaps, Andrzej, we can start with you.
Okay, so if it's just the two, so one will be about building the awareness and teaching people how to behave in the cyber world or digital space, which we are now doing so many things which we used to do in a traditional way before. So teaching and showing the cases where something goes wrong. So really putting a lot of effort into that on different level and through different means, not just putting somebody in a class for 2 days, but a lot more innovative ways to bring the attention of people to these matters and showing how important it is that you protect your identity online, you protect your data online, and what can happen if you do wrong. But also, if something goes wrong, what to do. So you don't sit down and cry, but there is help you can turn to, and somebody actually will provide some assistance to you to minimize or restrict the damage. So one of that's one. Second thing is, again, for the governments to help the industries, the sectors, the parts of the public which are less advanced in terms of building cyber resilience, help them do it through some best practices sharing, to creating some security operations center, let's call it, for given organizations, so they can very quickly increase their level of preparedness for cyber threats. Just these two.
Cyrian, what are your two top takeaways or advice for our audience?
Well, really quickly, thanks to CyberSec EU for inviting me and for putting on a brilliant conference in these very difficult circumstances. Two things. One, immediately tackle ransomware. Secondly, let's use the next 12 months to work out how to sell trust, whether that's trust in products, trust in services, trust in information. Trust doesn't sell in technology at the minute. And one of the solutions to cybersecurity problems is to work out how to sell trust and make trust sell.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Cyrian. And Flavio, you will be carrying the torch far longer than any of us in this. What are your two top takeaways?
All right, thank you. Thank you very much for organizing this great discussion. My two topics are DMARC for email is essential. WHO didn't have DMARC configuration on for email, which enables the certification that nobody can impersonate WHO email. We enabled that in May, and before May, we had about 5 million email messages being impersonated. So people receiving WHO email not being sent by WHO. So on top of the ransomware advice, which is somewhat connected, if all organizations enable DMARC and if the member states government support DMARC as a requirement for email, that will be fantastic for everybody. So that's number one. And the number two is embrace zero trust model, because only that will give us the risk level that we can accept. Currently, the misunderstanding or misconception that you can gain trust saying that the application is secure That is completely incorrect, in my opinion. We need to make sure that we have multiple layers of security, and this is what is based on the zero trust model. That's basically my message.
Well, fantastic. Andrzej Dopierała, Flavio Aggio, and Ciaran Martin, thank you very much for participating in this panel. Perhaps a short final word for me. While it's tempting to think that better tools can get us through a crisis like COVID, the reality, I think, as this panel has shown, is that it's considerably nuanced. Informed and competent leadership, trust in science and facts, and intelligent governance are all key determinants of success, and I think we need them now more than ever. Although uncertainty is inevitable, future pandemics and cyber threats are not. So let me simply conclude by saying that digital tools work when they are parcel of a whole of society approach to digital resilience and a practiced and drilled cybersecurity capability. And on that, thank you, gentlemen, and I'll pass you back to the organizers of CyberSec. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, especially thank you very much for all those takeaways. And now, dear virus, we're not finished with you yet, although it is time to thank all the participants of the panel that was very hot, and it did serve eradication of that virus.